My name is Claire, and for most of my life, I believed that being kind was the same as being safe. I believed that if I stayed gentle, stayed patient, stayed forgiving, then people would treat me with the same care I gave them. I believed that love would recognize love, that family would recognize loyalty, that marriage would recognize sacrifice. I was wrong. I learned the hard way that sometimes the people who smile at your kindness are only waiting for the moment they can use it against you. For 7 years, I was married to a man named Daniel. And for 7 years, I tried to be the kind of wife people admired from the outside. I cooked, I cleaned, I hosted holidays, I remembered birthdays, I cared for his mother when she was sick, I helped his sister with her bills, I paid for family dinners, and I said yes when I should have said no. I gave because I thought giving was love. I gave because I thought if I gave enough, I would be protected. I gave because I thought being useful made me valued. Daniel's family called me Sweet Claire. They said it like a compliment, but it was never really a compliment. It was the kind of word people use when they think you will not fight back. The kind of word people use when they have already decided you are soft enough to bend. At first, I did not notice the way they looked at me. Noticed how Daniel's mother, Linda, would smile at me during dinner and then criticize my every choice when we were alone. Claire, dear, maybe if you were more firm, Daniel would listen to you. Or, you're such a nice girl, but in this world, nice girls get taken advantage of. And Daniel would laugh when she said that, like it was harmless, like it was wisdom. His sister, Melissa, treated my kindness like an open wallet. She borrowed money and forgot to return it. She borrowed my clothes and returned them stained. She borrowed my time and returned nothing. Every time I helped her, she acted as though I had done what any decent person would do, which made me feel guilty for ever wanting thanks. Daniel himself was the worst kind of all, because he understood exactly how much I wanted peace. He knew I hated conflict. He knew I preferred quiet to shouting. He knew I would rather fold myself small than make a scene. So every time he wanted something, he reached for my softness like it belonged to him. At first, he was charming. He made me feel chosen. He made me feel beautiful. He used to kiss my forehead and tell me, "Claire, you are different. You are not like other women." I used to think that meant I was special. Now I know it meant he thought I would tolerate more than other women would. The first crack in our marriage came when my father died. He left me the family home I grew up in, along with a trust fund I had never touched and a portion of my mother's estate. I was grieving, exhausted, and still trying to be the strong one for everyone else. Daniel told me to let him handle the paperwork. His mother told me that a wife should trust her husband with money. His sister told me that family assets should stay flexible. That was the first phrase that made me uneasy. Flexible. As if my inheritance were not mine. As if the money my parents had left me was something that could be folded and moved around for other people's comfort. But I was kind, and kindness made me hesitate. I told myself not to think badly of them. I told myself they were just stressed. I told myself I should be understanding. So I signed where Daniel pointed. I trusted what he said. I believed him when he told me it was only temporary, only practical, only for our future. It took me almost a year to realize that my future was being quietly stripped away while I kept saying thank you for the privilege of being included. The house changed first. Not the walls, not the floors, not the furniture. The feeling. My home started to feel like a place I was allowed to live in, not a place I belonged to. Daniel's mother began coming over without calling. Melissa kept extra keys. Relatives I barely knew started appearing as if they had always lived there. They opened cabinets, criticized meals, rearranged my things, and called it helping. And every time I tried to draw a line, Daniel would say the same thing. Claire, Don't be dramatic. Claire, you're overthinking it. Claire, their family. That sentence became a weapon. Their family. As if family meant you had no right to privacy. As if family meant you had to accept disrespect with a smile. As if family meant your kindness was a debt they were free to collect forever. I still remember the night I made dinner for everyone. It was a Sunday. Rain was falling outside, soft and steady against the windows. I had spent hours cooking roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, homemade rolls, and apple pie from scratch. I lit candles. I set the table. I wanted the evening to feel warm, peaceful, human. For a moment, it almost did. Then Melissa complained that the chicken was too dry. Linda said the potatoes needed more butter. One of Daniel's cousins joked that I was lucky Daniel liked simple women. Then Daniel leaned back in his chair, looked at me with that lazy, confident smile, and said, "Claire tries so hard. It's sweet." Sweet. That word again. Not strong. Not talented. Not loving. Sweet. Like I was a dessert. Like I was there to be consumed. I remember standing there in my apron, holding the serving spoon, feeling something inside me go still. Not broken. Not yet. Just still. Because in that moment I understood something I had spent years refusing to see. They did not respect me. They appreciated what I gave them, but they did not respect me. And appreciation without respect is just a prettier form of exploitation. I said nothing that night. I cleaned the dishes. I poured coffee. I smiled when they laughed. I listened while they talked over me. And when they finally left, Daniel kissed my cheek and said, "See? That wasn't so bad." That was the night I stopped recognizing my own marriage. After that, things grew worse. Daniel began insulting me in smaller, sharper ways. If I suggested something, he called it emotional. If I disagreed, he called it irrational. If I cried, he called it manipulation. If I stayed silent, he said I was cold. There was no version of me that he respected. There was only the version that made his life easier. His mother became bolder. She told me I needed to be more grateful because Daniel had married down in order to be with me. I remember staring at her, unable to believe what I heard. I thought maybe I had misunderstood. She had the nerve to say, "You know, Claire, a woman like you should be thankful a man like Daniel chose you. A woman like me," as if kindness was a flaw, as if softness was a lower class, as if my value depended on how much discomfort I was willing to swallow without protest. I wanted to leave then. I really did. But people who have spent their whole lives being kind often confuse endurance with strength. I kept thinking, maybe if I stay calm, maybe if I explain myself better, maybe if I love harder, they will finally understand. That is the lie I lived under. Love harder. Be more patient. Be more forgiving. Be more giving. As if the solution to being drained was to pour faster. Then came the betrayal that finally opened my eyes. I had gone to the bank to review a few accounts. I was not snooping. I was just trying to understand our finances, because something had felt wrong for months. The bank manager looked uncomfortable when I asked to see the records. I remember the silence in her office, the slow turning of pages, the way my stomach dropped lower and lower with every line I read. Several accounts had been moved. Funds had been transferred. A property I believed we owned jointly had been quietly placed in Daniel's name alone. And there were signatures. My signatures, forged, copied, or used through documents I had never fully understood. I sat there staring at the papers, feeling as though the floor had vanished beneath me. All this time, while I cooked, cleaned, smiled, and served, Daniel and his family had been slowly taking ownership of my life. My money, my home, my trust, my voice. When I confronted Daniel that night, he did not deny it. He just looked annoyed. That was almost worse. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Annoyed. Claire, he said, as if I were the unreasonable one. You don't need to make this a thing. A thing. My entire future was a thing to him. He told me he had done what was best for the family. Linda stood behind him with her arms folded, and Melissa had the nerve to smirk. I asked him why he lied to me. He shrugged. Because you would have made it difficult. There it was. The truth. Not because I was foolish. Not because I was incapable. Because they had decided I would resist, and they preferred to act first. I will never forget the coldness that spread through me in that instant. The love I had been clutching for years fell apart in my hands like paper in the rain. I asked them to leave me alone. Daniel laughed. His mother said I was being hysterical. His sister said I was lucky they tolerated me at all. Then Daniel looked straight at me and said the words that ended our marriage. If you cannot be useful, Claire, then what exactly are you here for? What am I here for? I looked at the man I had loved, the family I had served, and I realized they did not see me as a wife, a daughter-in-law, or even a person. They saw me as a resource. That was all. I was the woman who paid the bills, hosted the dinners, absorbed the insults, and kept the peace. I was useful until I asked for honesty. Useful until I asked for respect. Useful until I asked for my own money back. Then the same people who smiled at my kindness called me difficult. That was the moment I knew my kindness had been mistaken for weakness for the last time. The argument escalated fast after that. Daniel shouted that I was ungrateful. Linda said I had no idea how marriage worked. Melissa said no one would want a woman who caused problems over a few financial misunderstandings. A few financial misunderstandings. That was what they called theft when it came from people who wore nice clothes and used polite voices. I remember the rain outside growing heavier. The house felt smaller and smaller, like the walls were leaning in. Daniel pointed at the door and told me, if I was so unhappy, I could leave. I said, "This is my house." He laughed at me. Then Linda said, with a smug little tilt of her head, "Not for long." I did not understand what she meant until Daniel finally admitted it. The home was no longer in my name the way I thought it was. Documents had been shifted. Papers had been signed. Attorneys had been consulted. Everything had been arranged while I was busy believing we were building a life together. My chest felt tight. My ears rang. It was like hearing my own life collapse from a great distance. And then Daniel did the cruelest thing of all. He told me to pack a bag and leave. Not tomorrow. Not after we talked. Not after we sorted things out. That night, he said if I wanted to keep making a scene, I could do it somewhere else. His mother nodded like a queen, approving a sentence. Melissa crossed her arms and smiled. I stood there in the hallway with tears in my eyes, and for one brief second, I almost begged. That is what kindness taught me to do. Beg for peace. Beg for mercy. Beg to stay. But something deeper rose in me. Something quiet. Something strong. Not loud like rage. Not messy like panic. Just a clear, steady certainty. No more. I turned around, walked to the bedroom, and packed one suitcase. That was all I took. A few clothes, my grandmother's watch, one old journal, and the small silver photo frame with a picture of my mother. Daniel followed me into the room and said, "Don't be stupid, Claire. You'll come crawling back in a week." I looked at him and said, "No, Daniel. You will never see me crawl again." He actually laughed. He thought I was bluffing. He thought I was too soft to survive without him. He had no idea that the woman standing in front of him had spent years learning how to survive people like him. I left that house in the rain with one suitcase and a shaking heart. And I did not know where I was going. But I knew one thing. I was never going back. The first night after I left, I slept in a small motel room near the highway. The bed was cheap, The walls were thin, and the sound of traffic outside kept me awake for hours. I sat on the edge of that bed and cried until I had no tears left. Not because I missed Daniel. I did not miss him. I grieved the years I had spent trying to earn love from people who only respected power. I grieved the version of myself that thought patience could fix cruelty. I grieved the home I had built with my heart only to realize I had been building a cage for myself. And somewhere in that grief, I felt something else begin to grow. Clarity. The next morning, I called my attorney. I gathered every document I could find. Bank records, property transfers, emails, screenshots, old notes. I found names, dates, numbers, and signatures. And the more I looked, the more I saw how carefully I had been manipulated. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan. They had counted on me not noticing. They had counted on me being too kind, too trusting, too polite to fight back. They underestimated me. That was their mistake. I filed everything. I froze accounts. I asked questions that made people uncomfortable. I stopped apologizing for needing answers. And when the truth came into the light, it was uglier than I had imagined. Daniel had used my trust to move assets into accounts he controlled. His mother had advised him. His sister had benefited from several payments. Family funds had been redirected through shared expenses that were not shared at all. They had eaten from my table while quietly stealing the table itself. My attorney looked at me and said, "Claire, this is serious." I said, "I know." What I did not say was that I was no longer surprised. Because once you see someone's character clearly, the rest becomes simple. The most surprising part was not the betrayal. It was how calm I felt after. For the first time in years, I did not have to guess what people meant when they smiled at me. I did not have to soften my words to keep the peace. I did not have to carry the emotional weight of people who never planned to carry mine. And then I made the decision that changed my life. I had always wanted to help children. As a little girl, I used to volunteer at a local shelter with my mother. She taught me that kindness was never supposed to stop at people who already had enough. She used to say, "The truest kindness is what you give when no one can repay you." I had forgotten that lesson while trying to earn love from the wrong people, but not anymore. I owned property, I had savings, I had investments that had been untouched before Daniel and his family got their hands on me. When the legal dust started to settle, I faced a choice. I could rebuild the life I had lost, piece by piece, and keep the rest for myself. Or I could do something that felt more honest. I could turn my pain into purpose. There was an orphanage on the other side of town called Haven House. I had visited once years earlier for a holiday donation drive. I remembered the children by the window, the chipped paint on the walls, the quiet way they smiled when anyone showed them attention. I remembered one little girl, maybe 6 years old, handing me a drawing of a sun and saying, "This is for you because you look sad." I had kept that drawing for years. So I called them. When the director answered, I introduced myself and said I wanted to speak about a major donation. I expected paperwork, formality, maybe even skepticism. What I did not expect was the sound of hope in her voice. I visited the orphanage 3 days later. The building was older than I remembered. The hallways were clean but tired. The children were playing in a courtyard with a few worn-out toys. Some of them were shy, some were loud. Some were too serious for their age, which is usually what happens when children have seen too much of the world too soon. I stood there looking at them, and my chest ached because I knew what it meant to be unwanted. Not because my parents did not love me. They did. But because I knew what it meant to be made small by people who should have protected you. I knew what it meant to wonder whether your feelings mattered. I knew what it meant to be treated like a convenience instead of a heart. So I asked the director what they needed most. She began listing repairs, supplies, books, new beds, heating, tutoring, food, clothing, funding for school uniforms, counseling for the children, a safe vehicle for transportation, and a better place for the older kids to study. The list went on and on. By the time she finished, her eyes had filled with tears because she thought I was just listening politely. I said, "I want to cover all of it." She froze. I told her I wanted to fund the renovation. I wanted to pay for meals, school supplies, medical care, winter coats, and music and art programs. I wanted the children to have a library, a computer room, and a garden. I wanted them to have more than survival. I wanted them to have dignity. The director stared at me like I had handed her the moon. And then I told her something I will never forget, saying aloud, "All my life, I was told I was too kind. Maybe I was, but I would rather be remembered for giving too much than for taking from children who already had nothing." That was the moment my new life began. I did not do it for applause. I did not do it to prove a point to Daniel. I did not do it to punish his family, even though I knew it would shock them. I did it because I had finally learned that kindness is powerful only when it is chosen freely. Not begged for, not traded, not used as a leash. Chosen. From that day forward, I became involved with Haven House in ways I never imagined. I helped them rebuild the nursery. I helped buy new mattresses. I sat with the children while they colored pictures and read books. I helped arrange scholarships for the older ones who dreamed of college. I met volunteers, teachers, social workers, and donors who cared because they wanted to care, not because they wanted something back. And little by little, I started to heal. Not all at once. Healing is not a dramatic moment. It is quiet. It is waking up and realizing your chest hurts a little less than yesterday. It is learning that your worth does not depend on someone else's approval. It is looking in the mirror and recognizing the woman staring back at you again. I cut off Daniel completely. No calls, no texts, no meetings without lawyers, no chances to explain his way into my life again. He tried, of course. At first, he sent angry messages, accusing me of being spiteful. Then came the softer tone. The apologies that were not really apologies. The line about how things got out of hand. His mother left a voicemail saying I was destroying the family. Melissa emailed me twice. One message calling me ungrateful, another begging me to think about everyone else for once. That phrase made me laugh. Think about everyone else. That was all I had ever done. They wanted the old Claire back, the one who stayed quiet, the one who made excuses, the one who gave and gave and gave until she disappeared. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger. Not harder, not colder, just clearer. I learned to live in a small apartment with white walls and a kitchen that did not need to impress anyone. I learned to buy groceries for one. I learned to enjoy silence that wasn't tense. I learned to sit on my balcony at night with tea and know that nobody in the world was taking advantage of me in that moment. I started to smile differently. Not the smile you wear to keep the peace. The real one. And the strangest part of all was this. Once I stopped trying to be useful to people who only wanted to use me, my life became fuller than ever. I found purpose. I found community. I found peace. A few months later, Daniel's financial gains began to collapse under legal scrutiny. The assets had been traced, the documents were reviewed. The lies, once dragged into the light, did not look nearly as clever as they had in the dark. His family had always counted on my silence. My silence was their security. But the woman they threw out in the rain learned how to speak with evidence. I never celebrated their downfall. I did not need to, because the life I had built without them was already a greater victory than revenge. I walked into Haven House one afternoon and saw the children playing in the courtyard I had helped renovate. The paint on the walls was fresh. The garden was blooming, there were books in the library now. Real beds, warm lights, new shoes lined up by the door. I saw a little boy running in circles with a paper airplane, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. And I stood there with tears in my eyes, thinking, this is what my kindness was always supposed to become. Not a sacrifice for people who despised me. A shelter for children who needed love without conditions. The director came over and placed a hand on my arm. She said, "You changed this place." I shook my head and answered honestly, "No, it changed me, because that was the truth. The orphanage did not just receive my wealth, it gave me my life back. It taught me that generosity is not weakness when it is guided by wisdom. It taught me that compassion does not mean allowing yourself to be crushed. It taught me that the kindest thing you can sometimes do for the world is refuse to keep feeding people who only know how to starve your soul." Now, when people ask why I gave away so much, I tell them the truth. I gave because I was tired of my blessings being used as weapons against me. I gave because I wanted my money to build something real. I gave because I had once been a woman who believed love meant endless self-erasure, and I wanted to become someone children could look at and learn a better lesson from. And yes, I lost a marriage. I lost a house. I lost a family that was never truly mine. But I found my voice. I found my spine. I found my purpose. And I found the freedom that comes from finally understanding that kindness is not weakness. Kindness is strength with a heartbeat. It is courage without cruelty. It is softness that refuses to surrender itself to abuse. So, if you are watching this and you have ever been told that you are too nice, too soft, too giving, or too emotional, let me tell you something I learned too late. Your kindness is not the problem. The problem is people who think they deserve it without earning it. Do not shrink yourself to keep people comfortable. Do not mistreat your own heart just so someone else can keep benefiting from it. And do not ever let anyone convince you that being gentle makes you powerless. I was gentle once. I was called weak for it. Then I was thrown out. A few weeks after I made the first donation, word started spreading faster than I expected. At first, it was just within the orphanage community. The staff told a few friends, the volunteers told their families. Someone from a local paper heard about a woman who had funded almost an entire renovation in one move, and suddenly people were asking questions. Who was Claire? Why would a woman give away so much? Why would someone walk away from wealth? Why would anyone choose children she had no blood relation to, instead of rebuilding her own life? People always ask questions when they cannot understand a quiet kind of strength. But I never gave interviews to explain myself. I did not want pity. I did not want to look noble. I did not want my pain turned into a headline. I just kept showing up. That was my answer. I showed up for the children. I showed up for the workers. I showed up for myself. And every time I walked through the gates of Haven House, I felt the weight in my chest getting lighter. There was one little girl there named Emily. She was shy at first. She never looked people in the eye right away. She liked to sit near the window and draw flowers with a pencil that was so short it barely fit in her hand. One day I sat beside her and asked, "What are you drawing?" She looked down and whispered, "A house with a garden." I smiled and said, "It's beautiful." She shrugged in that small, broken way children do when they are used to not being praised. So I asked her, "Do you live in a house with a garden?" She shook her head no. I asked, "Would you like to one day?" She looked up at me then, really looked at me, and said, "Can people like me have things like that?" That sentence almost destroyed me. Can people like me have things like that? I had to breathe before I answered. I told her, "Yes, Emily, people like you can have beautiful things, safe things, loving things. You deserve all of it. She stared at me for a long moment, as if she did not quite trust the words. And I understood why. Because when you have spent your life around people who take, you forget what it sounds like when someone gives without asking for anything in return. That day I made her a promise. I told her that one day she would have a real desk, real books, and a room that belonged to her. A few months later, she was one of the first children to move into the renovated study room. She ran in, touched the new shelves, and smiled so wide it made me cry. That was the kind of wealth I had always wanted. Not the kind that made people flatter you. The kind that makes children believe in tomorrow. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was falling apart. I did not watch it from a distance with satisfaction. I watched it with the calm sadness of someone who had already buried that life. The lawyers sent me updates. The accounts had been traced. The forged documents were examined. The pattern of transfers was too obvious to hide once professionals got involved. His family had been clever enough to lie to me, but not clever enough to lie forever. Linda tried to act innocent at first. She claimed she had only been helping manage the household. Melissa tried to argue that I had always been confused about money. Daniel, of course, tried the oldest trick in the book. He said I had misunderstood everything. He said I was emotionally unstable after the separation. He said I had turned bitter because I did not get my way. That was the moment I finally understood something very important. Men like Daniel do not fear losing love. They fear losing control. Because control is what they confuse with power. And once they lose it, they have nothing left to hide behind. The day I received the first major legal update, I was sitting at a small table in the orphanage kitchen, helping the cook peel vegetables for lunch. The phone rang, and when I saw the attorney's name, I stepped outside. The sky was clear. The air felt warm. There was a quiet breeze moving through the trees. I answered, and the first words he said were, "Claire, we have confirmation." My stomach tightened. He continued, "The records support your claim. There is enough evidence to move forward. You were not imagining this." I closed my eyes. Because that sentence mattered more than people realize. You were not imagining this. Those words healed something in me. Not everything, but something. For so long, Daniel and his family had tried to make me question my own eyes, my own memory, my own instincts. They had wanted me confused. They had wanted me apologizing for things I did not do. They had wanted me to feel guilty for noticing the truth. And now the truth was no longer mine alone. Now it was written in records, files, and evidence. I was right. I had not been paranoid. I had been betrayed. That evening I drove home through the city with the windows down and the radio off. I wanted to hear my own thoughts. I wanted to hear the wind. I wanted to hear the sound of my life moving forward. When I got home, I stood in my kitchen and looked around at the small things I had chosen myself. The mugs, the curtains, the plant near the window, the blanket on the couch. No one else had picked these things for me. No one else had entered my space and rearranged it to suit them. It was simple, but it was mine, and that peace felt bigger than any mansion had ever felt. A few days later, Daniel showed up at my apartment. I did not let him in. I looked through the security camera and saw him standing at the door with flowers in his hand. Flowers. After everything. He looked thinner, more tired, less certain of himself. He rang the bell 3 times. Then he knocked. Then he stood there waiting like I would come running back because he had the decency to appear sad. I opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. His face changed when he saw me. He tried to smile. "Claire," he said softly, "can we talk?" I looked at him and felt nothing warm. No longing, no fear, no pull. Just distance. I said, "No." He blinked, like he had expected more. "I made mistakes," he said. I answered, "You made choices." He exhaled sharply and said, "You don't understand how hard things got." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "You took my trust. You took my money. You threw me out of my home. And now you want sympathy because things got hard for you?" He looked wounded. That almost made me sad, because I knew he still did not understand what he had done. So I said it plainly. "Daniel, you did not lose me because you failed to love me. You lost me because you thought my kindness meant I would never leave." He stood there in silence. For the first time in our entire marriage, he had no smart answer. No joke. No excuse. No command. Just silence. And I realized that silence was the closest thing to truth he had ever offered me. Then I said, "Take the flowers and go." He did. He left them on the floor and walked away without another word. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a long time. I did not cry. Not because I was heartless, because I was done. There is a certain kind of peace that only comes after you stop hoping the wrong person will become who you needed. That was my peace. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. But peace. Months passed. The legal process continued. The orphanage grew stronger. More donors came once the renovation became visible. A pediatric counselor volunteered. A retired teacher offered reading help. A local carpenter donated time to build shelves. A bakery sent fresh bread every Friday. A woman who had lost her own son started helping in the playroom because, as she told me, these children need someone to show up. And one by one, people did. It reminded me that good still existed in the world. Quiet good. Steady good. The kind that does not need attention to prove it is real. One afternoon, the director called me into her office and handed me a folder. Inside was a letter from one of the older girls at the orphanage. Her name was Hannah. She was 17, almost 18, and preparing to apply for university. She had written, "Before you came, I thought people with money never cared about children like us. I thought kindness was only something people pretended to have. But you showed up when nobody expected anything from you. You proved that love can be practical and that safety is not a dream. I want to study social work because of you." I had to sit down, because I had given money. But what I got back was something much larger. I got purpose that multiplied. I got a future I had never planned for. I got proof that pain can become shelter when it is handled with enough honesty. On the anniversary of the day I left Daniel, I went back to Haven House alone. It was late afternoon. The light was soft. The courtyard was full of laughter. Children were chasing each other across the grass. A little boy had a paper crown on his head. Emily was watering the garden with a small blue can. The building no longer looked tired. It looked alive. I stood there quietly, and for a moment I remembered the woman I had been on the night I was thrown out. Shaking hands, rain-soaked hair. One suitcase, a broken heart trying not to scream. And then I looked around at what had grown from that ruin. Bits, books, meals, music, laughter, hope. I whispered to myself, "You did not destroy me." And I meant Daniel. I meant his mother. I meant his sister. I meant every person who had called me weak because I was gentle. They had not destroyed me. They had revealed me. Because strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is a woman standing in the rain and deciding she will never again beg for a place at a table where she is only being fed so she can be used later. Sometimes strength is a woman donating her wealth to children instead of rewarding cruelty. Sometimes strength is walking away without shouting, without begging, without returning to prove a point. That is the kind of strength I found, and I will never lose it again. Now, when people ask me whether I regret giving away so much, I tell them no. I do not regret it. I regret the years I spent giving to the wrong people. I regret believing that being patient would make selfish people become kind. I regret confusing endurance with love. But I do not regret saving children from cold rooms and empty cupboards. I do not regret turning my pain into something that could hold another person up. And I do not regret finally learning that when people mistake your kindness for weakness, the most powerful answer is not revenge. It is direction. Give your heart where it will grow. Give your time where it is respected. Give your money where it becomes hope. And walk away from anyone who treats your softness like a weakness to exploit. Because that is not love. That is theft. My name is Claire. They threw me out thinking I would disappear. Instead, I built a new life that they could never enter. And the best part is this: I did not become cruel to survive. I became wiser. I did not become bitter. I became free. And I used the life they tried to break to help children they never deserved to meet. And that was the moment I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. Freedom does not always feel like victory at first. Sometimes it feels like grief. Because when you leave a life that was built around pleasing other people, you do not just lose the people themselves. You lose the habits, the fear, the reflex to apologize, the urge to fix things that were never yours to fix. I had to mourn that version of myself too. The version of Claire who stayed quiet. The version of Claire who said yes when her heart was screaming no. The version of Claire who thought love meant being endlessly available. I mourned her, and then I thanked her. Because without that woman, I would never have survived long enough to become who I was becoming now. One evening, several months after everything changed, I sat alone in my apartment with a cup of tea and a stack of legal papers beside me. The city lights were glowing outside the window. My phone was silent. My home was quiet. No one was shouting. No one was demanding. No one was taking. Just stillness. For a long time, I had mistaken chaos for living. I thought love had to be noisy. I thought family had to be exhausting. I thought peace was something only lonely people experienced. But sitting there in that room, I realized peace was not emptiness. Peace was room to breathe. Peace was space to think. Peace was the absence of fear. And I had never known that kind of peace when Daniel was in my life. The next week, I returned to Haven House for the opening of the new library. It was a small ceremony, nothing extravagant. Just the children, the staff, the volunteers, and a few local supporters who had helped with supplies. The room was bright with sunlight, and the shelves were lined with books of every kind. Stories, science books, picture books, poetry, even a tiny corner for the youngest children with soft mats and alphabet blocks. There were balloons tied to the chairs. There was cake on a table in the corner. And there was laughter. Real laughter. The kind that rises from a place untouched by fear. When the ribbon was cut, the children rushed inside like they were entering a treasure room. They touched the books carefully at first, almost like they were afraid the shelves might disappear if they moved too fast. Then they started pulling out books, opening pages, pointing at pictures, calling to each other. I stood in the doorway and watched them. That was when Emily ran up to me with a book in her hands. She was smiling now, not shy like before. Her face was bright, open, alive. She held the book up and said, "Look, Claire, this one has houses." I smiled and knelt beside her. "It does." She hugged the book to her chest and asked, "Did you make this happen?" I thought about that for a second. Then I said, "I helped." She tilted her head. "But mostly you." I laughed softly, and then she did something I will never forget. She put her hand on my cheek and said, "You're not too kind." My breath caught, because children see truth in ways adults often cannot. I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked, "What am I then?" She thought carefully, like she was choosing the right answer. Then she said, "You're kind with a strong heart." I had to look away for a moment. Kind with a strong heart. That was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. Not too kind, not weak, not soft in a way that made me easy to hurt. Just kind, with strength living inside it. I carried those words with me after that. And slowly, they began to heal the deepest wound of all the one Daniel had left behind. For so long, I had wondered whether I was foolish for loving so deeply, whether I was naive for trusting too much, whether I was weak for wanting harmony. But the truth is, my kindness was never the problem. My mistake was giving it to people who did not know how to hold it. There is a difference, a very important difference. A kind heart in the wrong hands becomes a target. A kind heart in the right hands becomes a miracle. And that is what I was learning now. The legal case moved forward in stages. My attorney kept me informed, and each update brought another layer of the truth into the open. There were forged signatures, unapproved transfers, property manipulation, private agreements made without my knowledge. Emails that showed Daniel had been planning for months. Notes from his mother. Messages from his sister. It was all there. Piece by piece, the lies lost their power. But even then, I did not feel revenge. What I felt was release. Because every document that confirmed the betrayal also confirmed something else. I had been right to trust my instincts. I had been right to feel uncomfortable. I had been right to question what they were doing. That mattered more than they knew. Being gaslit by the people closest to you can make you doubt your own reality. It can make you feel foolish for noticing what your heart already knows. It can make you question your memory, your judgment, your worth. I had lived in that fog for years. Now the fog was lifting. And when the sunlight returned, the truth did not look kind to Daniel and his family. It looked exactly like what it was. Greed, control, cruelty dressed up as concern. The worst part was that none of them ever believed I would actually walk away. That was their biggest mistake. They thought my softness meant I would stay, no matter what. They thought my silence meant permission. They thought my patience meant surrender. They confused restraint with weakness. But restraint is not weakness. Sometimes it is the calm before a life-changing decision. Sometimes it is the reason the truth lands harder. Sometimes it is the strength to leave without making a scene. And I left. I left with dignity. I left with my head high, even when my heart was breaking. I left with nothing but a suitcase and a future they did not understand. That kind of leaving is its own kind of power. By the time winter came, my life looked completely different. I had developed a routine that belonged only to me. Mornings at the apartment with coffee and quiet, afternoons at Haven House. Evenings reviewing paperwork or reading books I had once been too tired to enjoy. On weekends, I helped plan activities for the children. We started a small art program. We planted flowers in the garden. We held reading circles. We decorated the walls with drawings and handprints and cheerful messages. One little boy, Marcus, liked to draw rockets. He told me he wanted to go to space one day. I asked him why. He said, "Because space is big enough for dreams." That sentence stayed with me. Big enough for dreams. That was exactly what we were building. A place big enough for dreams. I looked around one afternoon and realized the orphanage no longer felt temporary. It felt alive with possibility. And I knew then that this was not just a donation. This was a declaration. A declaration that my money would no longer go toward preserving the ego of people who did not deserve it. A declaration that my life would no longer be spent proving my worth to the wrong people. A declaration that love, when used wisely, can rebuild entire worlds. Around that time, I received one final message from Daniel. It was short. He said he hoped I was happy now. I stared at the screen for a long time before I replied. I did not argue. I did not explain. I did not defend myself. I simply wrote, "I am free now." Then I blocked his number. That was the last time I ever heard from him. And honestly, it was not dramatic. It was quiet. But quiet does not mean small. Sometimes the most powerful endings are the ones where you stop answering. A few weeks after that, the orphanage held a small winter celebration. There were warm blankets, hot chocolate, paper snowflakes on the windows, and music playing softly in the background. The children wore sweaters and laughed with red cheeks from the cold. At one point, the director asked me to say a few words. I almost refused. I had never liked standing in front of people. But then I looked at the children, at the staff, at the faces of people who had shown up with no hidden agenda, and I agreed. I stood in front of the room and held the microphone with both hands. My voice shook at first. Then it steadied. I said, "A long time ago, I believed kindness was something you gave to keep people close. I believed if I stayed gentle enough, loyal enough, forgiving enough, then I would be loved back the same way. But I learned something painful. Kindness is not a contract. It is not a tool for survival in the wrong hands, and it should never be used to keep you trapped." The room was silent. I went on. "I was once told I was too kind. I was told that like it was an insult. But today, standing here with all of you, I know better. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is what remains when cruelty has done its worst and still failed to turn you into someone bitter. Kindness is what builds libraries. Kindness is what fills empty rooms. Kindness is what tells a child they matter. Kindness is what saved me." By then, several people were crying. I was too, I continued. "So if you have ever been told that your softness will destroy you, please remember this. Softness is only dangerous when it is forced to live in a cruel place. Put it somewhere safe, somewhere honest, somewhere worthy, and then watch what it becomes." When I stepped down, the room erupted into applause. But what touched me most was not the clapping. It was Emily. She ran up to me with a folded piece of paper and handed it to me without saying a word. When I opened it, there was a drawing of a woman standing in front of a house with a garden. Inside the house were children. Above it, in shaky handwriting, Emily had written, "And after that day, I stopped asking whether I had been too kind. That question no longer mattered, because I finally understood that kindness was never my weakness. The weakness had always belonged to the people who needed to crush it in order to feel powerful. So I kept going. I kept building. I kept showing up. Spring came quietly that year. The orphanage garden began to bloom, and with it, something inside me bloomed too. The children planted marigolds along the walkways. The older boys painted the fence. The younger ones watered the flower beds with far too much excitement and not nearly enough caution. Every corner of the place began to carry the kind of life I had once begged for in my own home. Not luxury, not status, just warmth, just safety, just the freedom to be yourself without being mocked for it. And that, more than anything, felt like healing. One afternoon, I walked through the hall and saw a little girl asleep in a chair with a book resting on her chest. A boy beside her was carefully covering her with a blanket. No one told him to do it. No one rewarded him for it. He just did it because he saw someone needed care. I stood there for a long time watching them. That was when I realized what my life had become. I had escaped a house that treated kindness like something to exploit, and I had helped build a home where kindness was simply how people lived. That difference mattered. More than money, more than revenge, more than the house I lost. That difference was everything. Of course, Daniel's world did not go on untouched. The legal process took its toll. The truth moved through every room of that life like light, through broken glass. The people who had once laughed at my silence suddenly had to face records, signatures, timelines, and consequences. Their polished image began to crack. Their confidence began to thin. And still, I did not celebrate it. I never wanted their ruin. I wanted distance. I wanted peace. I wanted the right to exist without being used. That was the real victory. Not watching them fall, watching myself rise. There was one evening just before sunset, when I was sitting on a bench in the courtyard at Haven House. The air was soft and warm. The children were inside finishing homework. The windows glowed gold behind them. The whole place felt calm, and I felt something I had not felt in years. Not fear, not tension, not the need to brace myself. Just gratitude, not the loud kind, the deep kind, the kind that comes after suffering, after betrayal, after being tested beyond what you thought you could survive. I looked at the building, at the garden, at the children running through the grass, and I whispered to myself, I did not lose everything. Because I hadn't. I had lost the wrong things. I had lost the people who did not deserve me. I had lost the house that had become a battlefield. I had lost the illusion that love could survive where respect did not exist. But I had gained something far more important. I had gained clarity. And with clarity, I had gained freedom. That night when I got home, I found a small envelope under my door. Inside was a handwritten card from the orphanage staff. They had all signed it. The message was simple. Thank you for turning pain into shelter. I sat on the floor and cried. Not because I was sad, because I was finally seen for who I really was. Not a victim, not a fool, not a woman who was too kind. Just someone who had been hurt, healed, and chosen to give anyway. That is a rare kind of strength, and I had earned it. People often think transformation has to look dramatic. They imagine shouting, breaking things, revenge speeches, public humiliation. But real transformation is quieter than that. It is waking up one morning and realizing you no longer miss the person who betrayed you. It is learning that your worth does not rise and fall with someone else's approval. It is looking at your own hands and finally trusting them again. It is no longer calling your own softness a flaw. It is understanding that compassion can live beside boundaries, that generosity can live beside wisdom, that gentleness can live beside power. I became all of those things, not because I wanted to be extraordinary, because I had no choice but to survive honestly. And in surviving honestly, I became more than they ever expected me to be. A year later, Haven House opened a scholarship fund for older children leaving the orphanage. I helped name it. Not after me. Never after me. I named it the Safe Tomorrow Fund, because that was what I wanted those children to have. Not just food, not just clothes, not just a roof, a tomorrow they could trust. The first recipient was Hannah, the girl who wanted to study social work. She came to me before she left for university and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. She whispered, "You changed my life."